During the 1930s, dust storms ravaged the Great Plains. The worst of these became known as Black Sunday. When did Black Sunday happen? Just how bad was it? In the early part of the 20th century, overfarming, poor soil conservation techniques, and excessive livestock grazing had created a dangerous situation. The topsoil of the Great Plains region had been stripped of its nutrients, as well as the natural vegetation that had once held the soil in place. Then, 1930 saw the first year of what would eventually be an 11-year drought, in which precipitation, in the form of rainfall, snowfall, and other forms of moisture, was just a fraction of the normal levels. These factors combined to dehydrate the soil and turn it into a fine, powdery dust. The wind picked up large amounts of this dust and generated massive dust storms, which swept across the plains. The storms could reach more than 10,000 feet in height and produce winds from 50 to 80 miles per hour. The storms came to be known as black blizzards. The dust storms began in the early 1930s and continued to progress in severity and in number as the decade wore on. In 1932, there were at least 14 major dust storms. By 1935, there were more than 40, and 1937 saw more than 70. Historical records of the era were not kept accurately, and some speculate that there may have been more than 100 dust storms in one year. The worst of these dust storms occurred on April 14, 1935. The storm blew away an estimated 300 million tons of topsoil in just a few days. The sky became so filled with dirt that the sun could not be seen. Some witnesses described the event as a wall of dirt that the eyes could not penetrate. This storm became known as Black Sunday. The dust storms affected more than just the Great Plains region. Eastern cities such as Chicago, New York City, Boston, and Washington, D.C. also experienced these massive storms. The skies became so dark that streetlights were needed during the daytime, and there are even reports that the snow was red in Boston because the snow was mixing with the soil from a dust storm. Even sailors in the Atlantic Ocean report finding as much as a quarter inch of dust on the decks of their ships from these massive storms. Citizens across the nation lived in fear of when the next dust storm would come. As the events became much more commonplace, many learned to recognize the origin of the dust storm by the color of its dirt. Brown dust storms were from Kansas or Nebraska, gray from Texas, and red dust storms were from Oklahoma. By the late 1930s, the dust storms began to reduce in number. Increased use of soil conservation methods, as well as much-needed rainfall, helped to bring the dust storms to an end. However, the damage that had been done was irreparable. Scientists estimate that roughly 30 billion tons of the most nutrient-rich topsoil in the world had simply blown away.